Alright, so I want to show how I'm going to be doing construction editing inside of, to basically transform these objects. So if I play this, I can show you one of the examples that was already executing at the time. As soon as that plays, there. Now let me drag the scene over. There. So we can see this object over here is transforming. It's going through the different steps. I'm going to go into scene mode so we can see this a little bit more easily. Alright, so we can see the different segments of this model are broken apart, and we can see that they're expanding and folding and coming into view in different ways. And it's got kind of a nice feel to it. However, this one also has very flat segments that we can tell are like paper thin. That doesn't work well for making it look solid, to make it look like it's coming from something. So when these walls pop out at the end that look like they're concrete, that just doesn't seem to make as much sense. So I want to work on this to make it appear more solid as it's transforming. Plus, I just want this to go over the general idea of how I created these in the first place, what steps I used in Blender to do it. So let's go step into Blender and take a look. Or we'll get into Blender in a moment. Let's take a look at these objects. So first of all, I'm using a plugin or an asset called Buildings Constructor RTS. It's available in the asset store. It's really nice. Has a lot of these building pieces in it. And then we end up getting all these parts to build larger factory structures or whatever building type that we want, such as this. But as you can see, this factory has 2 of these segments in it. But I wanted every segment in this to be constructed dynamically. So I need to figure out how to do that. So let's go over here. And I've got the actual object selected, and I can see that the mesh comes from cubes. Specifically, it's called block 5. And we can see it's under cubes and blocks, block 5. And from there, so I know that we've got this cubes and blocks, which is an FBX file. So if I wanted to take a look at this, I can go right-click, show and explore, bring Explorer here, and we can see there is cubes and blocks. And here's a whole bunch of other tests. So along the way, I've ended up going through I've probably gone through about 6 iterations on this, and a lot of little tiny steps just to kind of test out unfolding and refolding of objects to see what looks good. And now I'm going through another sequence to test it. All right, so to begin with, I have my cubes and blocks here. I know that it was using something called block 5 when it was actually working with it. So let's go into Blender now, which is here. So here I have Blender, and it's set up to a default object. I'm going to remove the extra things in here, including this extra collection, and just hit delete. Alright, so now what I want to do is import File, Import FBX. Now I need to go find the location. Now I just happen to have been there recently and here, so it just pops up in my recent. And I can select Cubes and Blocks FBX. So when I import this, I now get this mashup of all these objects. This is not what everyone's going to go through. But there's something in here called block 5. So let me go ahead and clear out everything but block 5. Oops. There. So here's block 5. If I zoom in onto it, you kind of see that its structure matches the structure we were seeing here. So if I were to go back to this one, yeah, right here. So that structure is near identical. And that's because for an outline it is. Alright, so let me go back into Blender, and we have this one. Now, here is a major problem, one of the weaknesses that I found in the design. One of the first times that I was working with this, I ended up using this side over here and the opposite side as well to fold in a lot of the other stuff. Like I had the top cave in while the sides ended up folding out. But this looks like concrete. Concrete does not visually lend itself to being folded, whereas metal does. So thinking along the ideas of Transformers, the characters from the cartoons and the movies, I really was drawn to the way that that worked. But concrete is a material that doesn't look as pleasing for that motion. So when I had it fold into concrete, it didn't work well. Plus, the concrete was rather boring. There wasn't much going on. Perhaps if there were extra little features sticking out of this, that would work better. It would look nicer. But folding and stretching the concrete just did not come across well. So I ended up wanting to get rid of that as quickly as I can to allow for these other other pieces of metal that appear to have more going on with them. That way the visuals, I believe, came across more appealing. All right. But to make sure that I'm making my edits here well, I want to have those textures in place. So I'm going to go into here, and keep in mind, I am not an expert in Blender. I had to learn Blender all the steps of the way, and I've been doing it in various ways, and now I'm getting into shape keys. But textures have always been kind of an issue with me. I think this time is the first time I'm getting used to it. All right, so in this case, first thing I want to do is add that texture. Actually, I should just save this. I don't want to just hit Control-S. Because keep in mind, I just pulled in all of those other objects from the FBX file. I don't want to just save it, which actually I think if I saved it, file, save, let's just test this. Okay, perfect. It actually wants to know what blend file. I didn't want to overwrite the FBX. I didn't think it would in this case, but I've been using Control-Shift-S to save it anyway, just to force a save as. Okay, so in this case, I want to call this block 5, and I'll call it .3 in this case, .blend. You can see I have other instances and versions of this. This is technically the 6th instance of a file I've created, but inside of each file there are many revisions being added to them. All right, so save that one. So now we've got that one saved, and now I need to add the new material. So I'm going to go over to here, and we can see where it's got cubes 1, and if I expand this out, you can see there's cubes 1. There's that material that's in there, the texture, and basically it's just this metal shade thing. I'm going to select a material, and now that I've got this material selected, and we can see it changed to material here, I'm going to go down to base color and tell it to use an image texture. So now that I've got that image texture, I'm going to open, and again, I've been here recently, but in this case I happen to know it is in a subfolder of where I had the FBX file called textures. I'm going to select the textures, and I'm going to select cubes red. Now, oh, something's wrong there. Great. Oh, there. That's better. So I had to turn on viewport shading as well. Over here, we can see that over here I was just on the default, which is just giving me the object. It's not putting in any shader materials. I'm going to select, let's see, one of the other ones, like this one. This allows me to see it. It doesn't take into account lighting because I deleted the light. I don't really care to import a light every time that I'm pulling this back into Unity. I just want the basic object. All right, so over here I've got my object. It's textured now. And now I want to go into shape keys. So over here is my shape keys. I'm going to minimize the vertex groups. But I clicked on this icon for the object data properties, and then you can expand shape keys. And to begin with, it's empty. I'm going to create a basis. Just clicking the plus creates one called the basis. Now, the basis is important because this is what your foundation object is. When you think of, for my case, I wanted this object to start as a small cube that one of my drones could carry out there and look legitimate that it's carrying it, versus it carrying a whole building in front of it. But then I wanted to expand outward. Now in this case, instead of starting with a small object and expanding, I'm going to start with a big object and decrease it. And then inside of Unity, I'll have the scripts operate it in reverse. So we're starting with the basis being the building by itself. So now I want to add, let's see, I could click plus to create a new key, but I've found some issues with how that lines up. So I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to hit delete on, oh, I have to hit the minus on that. And now instead of clicking the plus, I'm going to say down arrow, new shape from mix. And I don't know why the other one gave me errors. It was also during the beginning of me learning this, so maybe I was using it wrong and it would work as expected. Okay, so now this key represents one modification step. Now that can be any number of things happening inside of this, but it goes smoothly it basically lerps all positions, rotations, etc. from one spot to another. Okay, so let's go into here, into the key, and I have the object selected. I'm going to hit Tab to go into edit mode. And now I want to select stuff to move. So I want to create a doorway, and since concrete doesn't show up, well, I want to make this concrete segment fold away as fast as I can. So I'm going to start by going to Faces, by selecting up here for the faces, and then I hit the first one, Shift, select the others, and then I'm also going to get this top. But there's more. If I turn around, I can see that there's a little segment of the concrete that comes up over here. So if I want to make it look like this folds in and up, and I'm going to do the same thing to the bottom and have it fold down, I want that to really show up well. I want that to move all the pieces together. However, if I take any piece from this and I try to move it, let me use this move tool, we can see it's stretching all these objects that it's connected to. Everything else gets stretched. But that's not what we want. So I'm going to undo that. And now I'm going to press Y. Now Y did nothing visual, but what it does do is it separates these faces from the ones that they're connected to on the outside. So now if I drag this away, we can see it doesn't stretch the other materials. I've now separated this. All right. So now that I have this separated, I'm going to undo just one undo to make it go back to where it was, and I'm going to rotate. Now I want to rotate this along the x-axis, so I'm going to hit RX. But before I do, just to make it clear as to why, I want this to hinge from the top. I want to act like there's hinges on the top, and this will fold up towards the middle here. Now, by looking at that, I can take a look, okay, that goes along this way. That's the way that it's going to be rotating along the axis. It'll rotate along, and I can see X up there. That's a quick reference. Now, I call that out now because as soon as I hit R, that little key that was up here in the corner goes away. And unless I happen to have memorized that red is for the X rotation, I'm going to be a little bit lost as to which rotation do I use. So in this case, since I don't want it going around with the screen rotation, I'm going to hit X. And now when I rotate, you can see it's now rotating just along that X-axis, which is great. Now you can also see that it's got a whole bunch of modifications. If I look up in this top corner here, that's where its rotation is. And I want it to get to close to 90 degrees. In fact, if I hold Control while it's rotating, you can see it's going to like even 5-degree increments. So I can just select until I get to negative 90. And then click with the mouse and release the Control button. So that was Control. I hit Control while it was rotating. Okay, so now that's there, but I need to position it. So let's select the position and drag it in. And I'm going to use some of the things to help position it. And I want to look at it from different angles to make sure I'm actually finding the right stuff. So right here, well, let's see, I'm going to adjust that up and down a little bit. Look over. That seam looks pretty good here. So I'm not really concerned about doing anything else with it. For references of how I'm manipulating the scene, I'm using middle click on the mouse to spin around. If I hold Shift down and then click the middle button, I can slide this around to get different angles and perspectives, and then I can use a scroll wheel to zoom in and zoom out. All right, but now that I have that object roughly where I want to, I'm effectively going to do the same thing for this one down here. Select, and a shortcut on here is that I can just unselect everything by clicking the background and then hold Shift down, so I'm actually selecting several things at once, and it selects everything that selection tool touches. So I don't want to end up selecting some of these other items in the background, so I have to be a little careful there. If I can get a nice even line here, I can select several things from here in one pass. It makes it a lot easier. I can actually just do that and collect all those things there. So now I've got the bottom one. Now I'm going to rotate this as well, but I need to hit Y on the keyboard. And now I'm going to rotate along the x-axis, and you can see it's rotating along the x-axis, but it's pretty free-flowing, so I'm going to hit Control, and now I can see in the top corner up here that when I move it, it's moving by 5 degree increments. And I want it to get to 90. So there we go, 90. It could be 90 or negative 90, whatever it needs to be. But again, this is not all the way in the corner, so let's fix that. So I'm going to start aligning it, and I'm going to look at it from the bottom to do this. Drag it so that is along the line there, and drag that in a little bit and then up. There. That looks pretty good. We can see over here just a little bit how they are not aligned well. So I'm just going to move that back, and then this one back just a little bit. There. Now, I don't have a shortcut for being able to find good, fast places to be able to look in on that and see where it's overlapping. So it's just kind of a matter of zooming around and finding a good spot to look at it. All right, but now that that's rotated, that's effectively what I wanted for this first key. So now I'm going to hit Tab, and you notice when I hit Tab and I exited that edit mode, all of a sudden that door is no longer there. It's just gone. Let's take a look at this. And over here I have basis and I have key 1. Now over on key 1, it's got a value that's currently at 0. I'm going to expand this. And now you can see as it expands, it looks like a door is folding out of the way. Technically, it scales and stretches a little bit along the way, because over here we see this top piece and it's actually going to shrink a little bit, and the length of this other piece is also going to shrink and expand at various times. But that's kind of hidden. The reason that it's shrinking and expanding is because this piece right here is not going in an arc to the spot that it's going to end at, which is how a hinge would work. Instead, it's lerping from this corner where it was down to the next corner that it's going to be. But when all of them move together, it kind of looks like it's on a hinge, and for the most part, a user's not going to notice it. And this seems like a cheat that is useful to have. So I'm going to finish the rotation, but you can see over here, like right here, this is about the shortest it gets. And then it's going to suddenly get a little wider. But on the rotation, it also just kind of looks natural unless you really know what you're looking for. Now, there is another problem here that shows up, and this was pointed out to me, is the fact that these flat faces really kind of disturb the illusion that you're folding up a physical object. And you can see it's a flat face right here. Because if it were folding in and it had any dimension to it, we would suddenly see that there is a top here to this entire wall, that it has a thickness that can be shown and called out. Similarly, when we're looking at different angles, like watch up here in this top corner, when we're looking at different angles, we can see that it changes really fast, and there's all this stuff here. Now, we're going to be looking at this from probably about this resolution and angle a lot of the time, so to a certain degree, that really doesn't matter that much, but to really just kind of bring in the rest of how this is supposed to work, I want to put those features in there. I want to make them show up. All right. So now, one thing that happened, like I can go ahead and take each of these face segments, like let me go to Tab. And you can see, oh yeah, and when I went into Tab, it brings me into the fully edited mode, whether the value is set here or not. I can go over to Basis, and I can see here's Basis, and I can edit Basis where I am. But key 1, this is where it ends. It ends here with the doors open. So you can select and move around from frame to frame and kind of see where that jumps to at least. Okay, so I want to be able to put in an extra border piece here, but I also want to be able to add an extra length of material here to kind of show up and work better at the end. So I'm going to select over here, and let's go to, I'm going to use the face tool. Or sorry, I was on the face tool. I now want the edge tool. And then I'm going to select the first edge, shift the next edge, shift the next edge. I can't do a drag select with this one. I have to select each individually because otherwise it ends up selecting all these other ones that it crosses over. It's basically anything that the selection touches, not just the ones that it completely includes. All right. So from there, I want to add a new face. Now remember, for this one, I needed to move up and down. So over here, I've got Z, which is what I wanted to pay attention to. So, this is going to cause an error. This is not going to work well. So I'm showing you this route first, and then I'm going to change it. So now that I've got all these selected, I'm going to hit E to extrude a new face. Now that gives me a new face, and I can just kind of try to manually drag it in here, but I'm not sure I'm going to get the right spot for this. So let me just now hit Y, because I want this sliding up and down along the Y axis. Oh, sorry, not the way I wanted to. Let's change that to Z. There we go, Z axis. All right, so I wanted it sliding across the Z axis, so I'm going to send something in, and I don't want it to go all the way through the floor. I also don't need to cover my sides, but I clicked, and now it's not quite touching the floor. All right, so we've got this in here, and now let's go back and take a look at the animation. Let me zoom out. All right, and then let's hit Tab, and now let's go to the animation frame, and let's expand it out slowly. Now, I'm not seeing that face anywhere in there. Now let's take a look at what's actually happening here. Zoom in a little bit here to break the fourth wall. Okay, so now I'm inside of here, and let's expand this. Let's let it play out a little bit more. But check it out. It starts at nothing and then moves its way down. It starts at nothing and then moves its way down. Remember, in the keyframes, you're basically deciding one frame of information about where each of the vertices are supposed to be, each one of these little corner pieces, where they effectively move to. So as it's expanding out and showing up, we end up seeing it just kind of fold out flat, which from the outside, there's going to be no reasonable angle that we'll ever be able to see that unless we literally put the camera inside. And then we'd have to effectively hide and protect everything to make that work. And even so, this would still look terrible. Okay, so if that's not going to work, I'm going to undo this. There. So now I've undone that. So I want to make sure that I have that wall plate in here. Now, how do I do it? Okay, so let's expand out, and now I'm going to go back to basis. In basis, I want to be able to see these different items. So let me go to selection on face mode. Select. Oh yeah, I can do shift select. Make it as flat as possible, which a trick for making it as flat as possible is if you're kind of centered here in the building, make sure that the blue line kind of just goes straight up through a center crease. All right, and now I'm just going to select here and drag across all of those. So now I've got that whole thing selected. Let's see if it separates. So right now we see it separates, and that's because even though we were in key 1 when we separated this segment out, the sections of this model are still maintained. Okay, so all those segments are maintained and can still separate here in the basis. Now I don't want that to separate, I just wanted to see that it could. From this point, what I want to do is I want to make sure that I can actually edit the inside of it. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to transform it, but I'm going to do a very specific hack to this. So as I move it, See, I move it along here, and as soon as I did, it came up with details over here in the corner. And I can see it and put it 0.2 meters outside of the object. So now I'm going to go into this and I'm going to say, let's give it a solid number, 0.2. All right. Or let's make it a little more obvious, just 1. Okay. So now, let me move. So shift, slide over here. Here's my object. So if I want to extrude on the faces and make a new face at the bottom, I need to select them with the edge tool. Select, 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 select. And then extrude. And in this case, we're going to be doing this along the y-axis. So E, Y. And now there I have it. Now, this also has some dimensions to it, so I can kind of just like line it up over here and get a nice flat line and kind of see, does it seem to line up well? And not completely, but what are we at? We're at negative 1.1, or negative 0.11716. Let's change that to a more natural number, negative 0.11 or 12. There. So now that looks pretty accurate. It might not be accurate. This might be a random number completely. But at least when I'm using whole numbers or closer to whole numbers, not decimals stretched out so far, I can kind of figure out and remember where I manipulated things. So now I want to move this whole thing back. So I'm just going to select like this, because from this angle I actually can see every single edge and vertex here, or every single face. So I just selected all the faces, and now I want to move it back. So I'm just going to drag it back. Now I could hold the control key, and it lets me move 1 unit at a time. And since we moved exactly 1 meter out, since I set it, that made it really easy to make sure it goes back to the original position. All right, so now that I've done that there, I'm going to do it over here too. Select. Oh, no, switch back to face mode. There. And not all those, I just want those ones. There we go. Now let's switch that. Center line is selected. Not quite. Control Z. Note for this is that when you hit Control Z, it changes what you have selected as well. So that's pretty useful. All right, so now that I've got these faces exposed, I'm going to hold Shift and select the bottom again to get all those. So now I've got this stuff at the bottom one, and I'll do the same thing. Let's just drag it out. In fact, I can hold Control just to drag it out by 1 exactly to begin with. All right, so now that I've got that one, I need to do the same thing to the top, which means I need edges. And then I will go here, 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 and here. Next, E to drag out at random, but I want it to move along the y-axis. So I drag here. Now you can also just hit the other axis keys to change it. But let's see. Direction, if I change this, you can see it goes in units of 1 if I'm holding Control, which is not what I want. Okay, so now that I've got that, let's get something in here. And remember the last one, we put in 0.11 or 0.12. We'll do the same thing here, except negative 0.12. And that should line things up pretty well, just like the last time. Okay, so now I'm going to select the whole thing, and I want an angle where I can get all of these at the same time. And then I'm going to move with the Control button. Everything is back in there. Now I have my base frame selected, or done. So I'm going to go back over to key 1. Now when I'm in here, we can see that some of the things ended up getting screwed up. That is expected to begin with. So let's go out of here, just hit Tab, and let's watch what happens when I change the key value. That ends up sliding the whole thing out of the way. So why did this happen? And I can tell you some of the reason. Now, I don't know all of the details entirely, but when we change the design, we're changing the number of how the keys work. So we ended up losing some information there. Whoops, I don't want to scale that. So to fix this, I'm going to go into the key, go back here. Tab. Hey, come back here. Click this one. Tab. There we go. Okay, so I've got it selected. Now let's go find the object. Come back. Oh yeah, I'm in the tab edit mode. There. All right. I'm a little zoomed in and got a little lost there. So we can see here is our object, and we can see it even has this extra sheet in here that was a little bit flattened out. Let's go ahead and fix this. So first of all, it's all selected because what just happened? There it is. I just moved. All right, shift there, and then let's go to the outside. I've got a lot of controls to learn on this software. I keep trying to use it like Blender or Unity. I wonder if it has Unity hotkeys for being able to figure out and manipulate where things are. Okay, so I'm going to select everything over here. Let's try to get an angle where I can see all of the stuff and still have it separate. So I'm just going to select that like here. Done. And now I'm going to drag this over, go back, and we can see the whole thing just got kind of manipulated over. Let's just change it to 1. And that looks pretty accurate. The whole thing just moved over by 1. But the here's now where we get to another key part of this. Okay, so I want each of these frames to go down. Let's just, not what I wanted. I need this corner to drop down, so I'm going to select these edges. And I'm going to have them drop down. Now remember, I already know that the dimensions that this is from this position is 0.10, it's a 0.12. So I'm going to try to move this a little bit. Oh. And I'm going to select another tool so that I can see through here. So I've got X-ray turned on. That's this little thing over here. So I can see these lines. I can see where they are. And inside of here, okay, there it is. Oh, it's still kind of covered up a little bit. Interesting. Okay, but I have the lines selected already. Now I'm going to select the move tool. And now when I move this, I can see that line gets manipulated. So I'm just moving it a little bit to kind of a 45-degree-ish angle. And I can see over here it's pretty close to the dimension change I had before, -145. I'm going to change this to -12. Oh, sorry, -0.12. And then I'm going to change the Y as well to -0.12. Oh, come on, select -0.12. Now, I think that moved it to a 45-degree angle. I'm going to go the opposite. Let's just turn it into a positive number. There. Now we actually just set that up to be inside. So I'm going to expand or go back to where I was. And let's go back to out of tab mode. And now let's watch this change. So now we can see inside of here we have this extra lock, or this extra block piece. From the angles that I can see, that block piece covers up and acts like a normal thing. Now remember, it does slide a little bit off from how we would expect it to. It doesn't go in the same sweeping pattern that it should go into, but it's close enough. All right, so from this one, I'm just going to watch that value finish out, and then that made this look pretty solid by comparison. Now you can see that the texture pattern is literally a repeating pattern of whatever the tile piece had here, because I'm not doing anything with the UVs to address this, and honestly, I don't even know how. But for this, I don't even think it's that necessary. It does limit where I can select from, such as I can select from this red edge or even this gray one, and it just kind of makes it look like this material, this honeycomb appearance, is actually part of it all the way through. Anyway, so there we have the thickness of that wall set as 0.12 meters, I assume. Of course, in this actual system, we have this whole thing scaled up, so it's considerably larger. All right. So next, over here, this face of this side also does the same thing, so I effectively need to stretch this out. Okay, so let's go back to basis. I'm going to hit save. Oh, and I'm inside. You'll notice it didn't move anything. I've got to get into tab mode. There. I'm inside of tab mode, and now I'm in basis, and I can swap between these two states. I'm also going to get rid of X-ray view because that is not as useful unless I really want to see the lines. It gets a little confusing. Okay, so I want to get these parts to also expand out. So now I'm going to go to edge selection, which I have. Edge and edge, which I'm holding shift to select multiple. I hit E, and now I can expand that one out. But let's do this across the Y-axis, this way. I'm going to do that till it's here, because I basically just aligned it with this piece up here at the top. All right, now I'm going to do the same thing with the other side, from right here and right here. And now I'm going to extrude E along the Y-axis till it's right about here. Now for this, it really only needs to be visual. I'm not going to be expanding out on that other corner any more than that. All right, and you can see the material is just kind of stretched there, which this is only going to show up for a moment. And the fact that it looks stretched might not even look stretched as much as it looks like metal that was kind of scraped up against. So I think that works just fine here. All right, so now let's go ahead and do a final test of this. Oh yeah, and I just expanded that out. So let's tab this out, and we're going to see that this expands slowly as everything else is expanding, because I just did that on key 1 and not basis. So let's go to, we'll go to key 1, and then let's expand the value. And you see how that metal piece expands to close that in? That doesn't look too real, because in a single motion, we're taking something that's approximately, at least from this, about 0.5 centimeter long and having it cover about 2 centimeters in length, as if something slid out from there. That doesn't work well. So we want that piece to look solid, as if it were solid to begin with. So let's go alter this. I'm going to go back into edit mode. I hit tab multiple times until I can see all of the face lines, or all of the edge lines show up. And I'm going to select basis. And now inside of basis, I am going to select over here. Let's find this. Oh, let's go to key 1. And I will select the lines that I want. So I'm inside of key 1. This is a really useful trick. You switch from keyframe to keyframe, but it keeps the selection of which edges you had. So when I go into basis, I can now go into here and I can say basis, and now I'm going to just move the items that I have. Now it's hard to see what I'm moving, but you can see if I go this way that it goes the opposite direction, but I need it to be just over here. So now I'm going to hold shift and move over this way. And I want that edge to show up in here. So let's drag that a little bit, and you can see there it's just starting to poke through right up there. But if I drag it back, I can get it just out of view. There we go. So now between the keyframe or the basis frame and key 1, this stuff is there, but now it's in key 1, it's also moved twice the distance. Remember, it's important to make your changes in basis first, which I did accidentally. There may be shortcuts to end up dealing with some of this stuff, but I don't know them. All right, so now that I'm inside of key 1, I want to manipulate this again. So I've still got the object still selected. Immediately, oops, I don't know. I want to move it. Control Z. There. There we go. So now I'm moving and I'm using that same alignment with that little corner notch there. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. There. So now let's go test this out. Let's go out of tab, and inside of here we can see it's held its position and it keeps its position. That's important. This line stays there and makes this section feel much more solid. All right, so that's effectively how I'm building this solid section of materials that fold up. Okay, so that's the key areas of this. Essentially, I'm going to be traveling along seams, disconnecting things, reconnecting things, and making it look like something solid. Now, there is another hack that we can put in here. Don't think of this as Blender alone, where all of a sudden we have to create new edges or faces or put in new objects in here, which we could do that as well. But instead, think of this along the lines of part of a marriage between Blender and Unity. So from Blender, we're going to be taking care of the base model, but that's like the structure of this building. If we have things like pipes or other stuff running through, that's a great item for the drone to actually put in place. So the drone can carry it inside and do a little welding animation to put sparks in. That would allow all this additional stuff. So sometimes you can think of, is something inside of here going to cover up what I need? And that's one of the big things you want to keep in mind. That most of your animation will happen here, but some of the touch-up and some of the ways that things happen will happen inside of Unity only. All right, so now that I got this object in place, I'm basically just going to continue with everything else. Now, I could do this the same way on where I could have mirrored this and pulled in the mirror options on this, which tab that's like up here to do mirroring while I'm editing, but I didn't want to. One of the key reasons for that in this case is because if we have a drone working on it, I'll have them do their modifications on one side to basically unlock or to weld the items in certain places. Or have tooling that happens, animations that make it look like they're building a piece, and then the side folds up. And after that, the drone comes around to the back side over here and manipulates this wall, and then this wall caves in, or vice versa. It does the exact opposite. It expands out, and then the drone comes up and appears to weld the sections of the walls in place, welds the seams or the edges together. Now, you don't need to worry about how much space this is going to take or how much of these awkward parts are there, or the fact that the material, as we'll see in Unity, is double-sided. We don't need it to be, but for the regular model. But this is not going to be the regular model. All we're doing is making a special animation model to go from a tiny block into the final model, and then we just replace it. With the more streamlined one that can deal with level of detail, and it has no scripts on it to do manipulations or special animations aside from the construction. It's just here for construction. All right. So now that's this side. I'm going to save this again, make sure that save is in there. Now let's go into Unity. So over in Unity, down here, I should have blocks 5.3. I'm going to drag that in place here. And we can see it already has its texture because it comes with a default material that you can see there it is. But I don't want to use that one. I actually want to use the cubes material that we were using originally. That has all of the extra effects in it. So I'm dragging that in there. Now I've got that metallic shine on here. Also, the scaling is notably different. So I'm going to select this other building over here of this correct sizing and copy scale, and then go back to this one. This little one, and I'm going to paste the scale. There. Now I have this at the same size dimension. I was trying to operate it like Blender. Okay. So now let's move it somewhere where it's out of the way. Well, let's just take this one and delete it, and take that one and delete it, and take that one. This one will keep the same. This one has an animation, a special animation script I have, so we can see it build. Blend shape simple animation script. But let's click over to this one, and we can see the skinned mesh renderer. Now it has blend shapes, one blend shape. It doesn't include the basis here. We are at basis right now, but it has this. Now if I go over to the side, we can now see what this looks like. Alright, so now I'm here over at the side, and I've got some trees in the way, so... oh, and just take the whole object and move it over here. That works. Okay, but check out how solid this looks. If you do it really slow and you know what you're looking for, you can see that the materials stretch. But for the most part, this is just an animation of a door opening. It looks like a material that can physically move along the side of the other one. Alright. And so that's our first door and gateway, and it works. That's awesome. Now I just need to go back through and start adding the rest of them, which will be mostly the same as what we've already seen.